So this is from Amnesty International, and they wrote this piece. This is from January 30th. It says Canada temporary visa program enables abuse migrant workers, treating them as disposable. A new report says. So they state Canada's temporary foreign worker program is designed in a way that facilitates shocking abuse of migrant workers. Amnesty International said, "Hey, the report Canada has destroyed me. Labor exploitation of migrant workers in Canada exposes the impact of the TFWP, the worker program, which allows employees to hire migrant workers primarily for low paid jobs across various sectors, including agriculture, food processing, the care system, construction, and hospitality. The foreign worker program visas tied workers to a single employer who controls both their migration status and labor conditions. People who currently employed or have worked under the program told Amnesty International that after arriving in Canada, they were forced to work long hours without rest, receive lower pay than agreed. They were often assigned tasks that not included in their contract, suffered physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Many of them worked in unsafe conditions, lacked access to adequate housing and healthcare, and faced discrimination in the workplace. Most of them were unable to access effective remedies for the abuses they endured. So this is why we have this influx of migrants, why we have the open door policy is because corporations exploit the migrant situation, the influx of immigrants coming to the country, and dangle a carrot in front of their nose saying, hey, we'll provide employment for you. That undermines Canadian workers and undermines our economy class. They give it to a foreigner for low wages. They sign them up for this worker program, which allows them to not treat them like an actual employee because under this worker status, they don't get the status of a employee. So they get to undermine their wages. They don't get the benefits. They don't actually treated with the same principles and rulings that Canadian workers would get. And this is all part of this exploitation, the human trafficking done by corporations in this country. And they've been doing this for quite a long time, ladies. The abuse experienced by migrant workers in Canada is deeply troubling, especially for a country that claims to be a leader when it comes to protecting human rights, said Erica Guavara Rosas, Senior Director for Research, Advocacy, Policy, and Campaigns at International. Many migrant workers have told us they came to Canada hoping to secure a better future, yet instead, they felt they were treated like slaves. These workers are vital for putting food on our country's table and caring for the elderly. They deserve much better. So, again, this is why I don't blame the immigrant for stealing your job, as they say. That's all propaganda. That's all for you as a Canadian to put the blame on someone lower on the economic scale who's more in a vulnerable state than you are. They do that purposely to undermine us and to be angry at each other, than rather than being angry at the company or the corporation that exploited your job and sent it off to a migrant. And they do it purposely to cut back on labor costs, extend their profitability, and it exploits everybody. It undermines the entire fundamental foundation of a healthy Canadian working class. They do this a lot in America. They do it a lot here in Canada. They do it all over the place. This is how they're exploiting uh, countries and undermining the working class of individual nations. And it's all to serve the billionaire class. Many migrant workers under the Foreign Temporary Worker Program work and live in remote locations, therefore depend on their employer for accommodation, access to health insurance, or transportation, yet medical care, sorry. They face termination of their contracts and swift repatriation if they fall sick, suffer injuries, or are no longer considered fit for the job. Benedict, a woman for Cameroon, suffered racist, psychological, sexual abuse at the hands of her employer as soon as she arrived in Canada in 2016 with a 2-year tied visa to work on a farm. She was made to work 70 to 80-hour long weeks, performing tasks including domestic work, and was substantially underpaid and was constantly controlled. Her employer deceived her, promising to bring her children to Canada to continue exploiting her. She eventually fell sick and was diagnosed with severe anemia. Uh, when she finally left the farm in July 2018, her employer canceled her visa, calling her an irregular migration status. I did not expect to be a slave here, she told Amnesty. Most of the 44 workers interviewed by Amnesty International reported unpaid wages and excessive working hours. Some contracts by Amnesty International stipulated zero rest days. Some workers reported being subjugated to racist language by their employers and supervisors, including being called donkey, Indian, or shitty Mexican. A Jamaican woman said her supervisor told her to go back to the tree where you came from, and a few reported being physically assaulted by their employers. Many lived in inadequate housing, and a few said they did not even have drinkable water in their accommodation. Some workers suffered severe injury or developed medical conditions as a result of unsafe working conditions. Workers report threatened with reparation by their employers in a few cases where they were taking the airport against their will. Many workers report suffering discrimination at work, including being tasked with the hardest physical jobs, which they could not refuse. Women reported gender discrimination. Aline and Sylvie, not real names, two Ivory nationals working in a nursery home, told Amnesty International they had to commit to pay the recruitment fee incurred by their agency host and the employer in Canada in case they failed to comply with their commitments. These included not being pregnant at the time of departure, not being getting pregnant, and not abandoning employment before their 2-year contract ended. So now you understand why the the United Nations had that rapporteur, the special investigator, to write that piece about Canada using modern day slavery tactics. That what we're doing here, using the temporary foreign worker program and having these open borders, is abusing the system to flourish companies to abuse these people and undercut them as not as employees, but to use them as slaves, to use them as cheap labor. And because they're part of this program, they don't have to pay them a decent wage. They don't have to recognize them as you do a regular employee. And we see this with a lot of corporations. This primarily also with retail giants. We see horns. We see this with Walmart. We see this all over the place. And it just seems like nothing's really being done about this. And they're just letting this happen. That corporations that are paying the government to have these open border measures, why we live in a kind of fascist oligarchy, direct connection between the government and corporations to conspire together to build up on these policies. That is why we have this situation. And concerning the fact that many Canadians are getting pushed aside and getting exploited through this just to bring in cheap foreign labor, that these people thought they were going to get a better life. They got roped into this exploitation. Again, that's why I don't blame the immigrant. I'm very much pro-immigrant. But I'm against the corporation for exploiting all of us in this process. And so far, our government is not willing to handle this seriously. And in fact, the most retaliation we get from Justin Trudeau or Mark Miller or any of the other ones is, hey, we're just going to take a quick pause on immigration. We're not actually going to investigate this issue. We're not actually going to go after people. We're just going to take a slight pause. Meanwhile, more and more companies are abusing further of the temporary foreign worker policy to, again, undermine Canadian workers and to undermine people from organizing to build a union and to get livable wages, to suppress uh, a real standard of employees so they can get cheap labor. Corporations have been using this for quite extensive time now in this country. And this is what's happening behind closed doors. Many workers fail to report their abuse they suffer out out of fear of reprisals, including unfair dismissal, non renewable of their contract, and reparation. Those who do complain are faced with Canada's complex enforcement system, which does not design to protect individuals with precautious status who often don't get the time to engage in proceedings or may not be able to navigate bureaucratic systems in either of Canada's official languages. For example, for example, Walter arrived in Canada to work in agriculture on a 2-year tied visa, but was subject to long working hours and was not provided with the necessary protective equipment. He was also banned from eating, drinking, or taking a break except during transportation. Eventually, the owner of an unauthorized placement agency deceived Walter and several of his coworkers into believing he could help them change jobs lawfully. For a year, he lived in the basement of the owner of the placement agency and was not allowed to leave except to work on jobs that the agent arranged for them. How is this not modern day slavery? That you're harboring people, you're trafficking people from another country, telling them that they're going to be prosperous in another country. You're going to smuggle them into Canada, promise them a job, promise them housing, and you throw them into their basement. They're not allowed to leave unless working for the industry that's exploiting them. And they don't get a livable wage. They don't get food. They don't get water. They don't get any of that. No wonder. No wonder why Donald Trump is concerned about the border. No wonder why the United Nations put out that direct piece against Canada for abusing these policies. And primarily, we've explained this before. If you look at the statistics, there was a huge increase the moment we shut everything down during COVID. We told people that they had to be laid off, that they had to be fired because of the pandemic, and then there was going to be economic turmoil. And in order for Justin Trudeau to not have a recession, he allowed for companies to exploit this to get things back in order when they told working class Canadians that they couldn't go back to work because of COVID. They did this intentionally. They did this intentionally. So it says, my work permit at work almost killed me. If we did not obey, we would be deported, he told Amnesty International. Again, they did this intentionally. They have NGOs that are working together to harbor these people from their homeland and smuggle them into Canada. We have seen that with the student visa scandals. We have seen that with the worker visa scandals. We have seen this throughout. And large corporations, international entities, and places like Tim Hortons, for example, which has an international investment firm at the top, Restaurant Brands International, that runs these franchises, definitely abuse this system. They definitely abuse this policy. Unlike unlike other temporary labor schemes in Canada, the temporary foreign workers visa don't allow migrants to change employers. The foreign program visas are mostly granted to low-skilled workers from low and middle income countries in the global south with a majority of black, Latin American, and other racialized populations. Oh, good. So we're getting the DEI. We're getting the DEI out of this. So that's, again, another way to exploit this is, oh, well, we're getting primarily colored people. You can't point at anything of this out because that makes you a racist. makes you bigoted if you show the exploitation. In 2023, the top countries of origin for the temporary foreign worker program workers were Mexico, India, Philippines, Guatemala, and Jamaica, together representing almost 70% of the work permits granted. Labor exploitation of migrant workers under Canada's temporary visa program is not the result of just a few unscrumptious employers. Instead, the program has been designed in a way that enables abuses against the migrant workers. Moreover, low skilled and racialized workers are subjected to a high risk of labor exploitation for long periods of time, as they may continue traveling to Canada year after year with little prospect of attaining a more secure status due to Canada's immigration system, which privileges high skilled workers for permanent residence. Canadian authorities are well aware of the abuses that take place under the temporary foreign worker program, yet they have implemented very limited measures to address some of the abuses, such as increasing inspections. And that's because the Canadian government is in cohorts with the companies that abuse this system. And in order to abuse this system, they have open border policies. They have to have the lax immigration system that doesn't have the checks and balances, that we can't hold accountable, that we can't actually look into anything. And you get these undocumented people that could be criminals, they could be potentially legal, they could be dangerous to society. We bring them in because companies can exploit them for cheap labor. And it exploits them, it exploits us, it exploits the working class system in this country, but it flourishes the top tier billionaire class, which wants this extensively. Just remember Bernie Sanders, when he mentioned about open border policy, once upon a time he said it was Koch brothers' idea. And then all of a sudden the billionaires got to him and scared him enough to say, "Oh, we got to have open borders. We got to have sanctuary cities." And if you mention about it, you're a racist. You're bigoted. Because they use that as a scheme. They intentionally bring a majority of Black, Latino, and other racialized populations purposely, that you can't call this out without being deemed a racist or a bigot by someone in the upper class that's purposely exploiting these people. Which that is the racist part. That's why DEI is a racist agenda. Because it doesn't actually look at people at the content of their character. It looks at them by the color of the skin and abuses them based on their appearances. So this is what kind of retaliation our government is capable of, because they're very milquetoast this situation. So the Toronto Star says Ottawa announces crackdown on bad actors abusing the temporary foreign worker program. But read the bottom line here. Advocates say Ottawa's promises fall short of protecting migrant workers from exploitation. It's not just about a few bad apples. It's the entire system is rotten to the core. And that was from the summer of last year, August 2024. So this idea that Justin Trudeau is going to step up and fix the immigration crisis that they have created is a joke. And they did this intentionally. That's why they only said that they're going to take a pause rather than actually having legal immigration and putting a strong border measure to protect the safety and sovereignty of this nation. They're going to cave to the corporations because the corporations are their biggest donors and contributors. They keep Justin Trudeau and Mark Miller and all these other people in power. And that's why they're going to pretend to wave their fist and shake arms and be phony outrage about a few bad actors. No, it's the entire system The entire process. There should be a criminal investigation going on about the abuses of the temporary foreign workers. They should be looking into companies that purposely exploit it. They should be investigating Tim Hortons. But they're not doing that. They're not doing that. And now you understand why we're in the mess that we're in right now and why Donald Trump got viciously angry at our lax border crisis, that we have no security, we have no defense. And he ultimately had to make a decision to say, hey, Canada, wake the hell up, do something about it, do something about the fentanyl trafficking that we also know about, or you're going to get tariffs. And what the Canadian politicians do? Nothing. And now here we are. Now here we are with tariffs by Donald Trump. And all the other ministers are going, boo hoo, why the hell would you do this to us? When they had every opportunity to try and stop this. Every opportunity. And all this is doing is undermining us. We get thrown under the bus once again by their horrible policies, by not listening to us, by not protecting the middle class, by not protecting Canadians, the working class Canadians. So once again, undermine us for their unscrupulous power and protecting their donor class, the billionaire class, the exploitative global agenda that wants to continue exploiting people, that doesn't care about sovereignty, doesn't care about nations, and just wants to abuse people for cheap labor in the most heinous regard whatsoever.